If you're over 65 and still driving the same way you've driven for decades, 2026 could become the year you face fines, flags, or even license suspension without realizing you've violated a new rule. And here's what makes this particularly concerning. Many of these updated driving regulations don't feel new at all. The roads look the same, the signs appear familiar, and your habits remain trusted. But beneath the surface, the enforcement system has shifted quietly, automatically, and in some cases, permanently. Starting this February 2026, several provinces across Canada are implementing enforcement rules that don't depend on warnings, officer discretion, or even direct police contact. Cameras, algorithms, and insurance-linked databases are now doing the monitoring. This means you could be a careful driver who respects speed limits, never touches your phone behind the wheel, and still find yourself paying hundreds or thousands of dollars because of a single moment you didn't realize was now illegal. This isn't about creating panic. It's about building awareness. Because the drivers being affected most right now aren't reckless young people. They're experienced drivers who assumed the rules hadn't changed. Here's what makes 2026 different from every previous year. In the past, when driving laws changed, you typically heard about it. There were news stories, warning periods, grace phases. In 2026, the shift isn't really about brand new laws, it's about new enforcement. The rules you think you understand are now being interpreted more aggressively, enforced more precisely, and punished more expensively than ever before. And for seniors, this matters more than for any other age group because the consequences ripple further into insurance rates, license renewals, and even medical reviews. Across the country, provinces are under pressure to improve road safety, recover infrastructure funding, and reduce liability. Their solution has been automation. Automated enforcement doesn't care how long you've been driving. It doesn't care about your clean record. It doesn't issue warnings or explain itself. It simply records, reports, and forwards the violation, often directly to your insurance company or provincial motor vehicle department. And once that happens, correcting the mistake is no longer simple. Many drivers assume that if something were truly serious, they'd be notified clearly. But in 2026, notification often comes after the damage is done. A ticket in the mail, a registration renewal suddenly denied, an insurance bill that quietly jumps 20%. For seniors living on fixed incomes, these aren't minor inconveniences. They're budget-breaking surprises. And what makes this worse is that some of the most impactful changes aren't happening nationwide. They're happening province by province, municipality by municipality. What's perfectly legal where you live may trigger a citation the moment you cross a provincial boundary. This is where most people get caught. They rely on what's always been true. They rely on experience. But experience no longer protects you when enforcement is automated. The system doesn't care that you've driven safely for 40 years. It only cares about what the camera, sensor, or database recorded in that moment. That's why so many drivers in early 2026 are saying the same thing. I didn't even know that was illegal. And that's exactly why this matters now, before February becomes March, before renewal notices arrive, before a simple errand turns into a financial headache. Because once a violation is logged, you can't talk your way out of it. You can't explain context to a camera. You can't appeal common sense to an algorithm. Prevention is the only real protection left. Over the next part of this discussion, I'm going to walk you through the most important driving rule changes taking effect in 2026, with special attention to how they affect seniors age 65 and older. Not rumors, not speculation. These are enforcement policies already approved, funded, and in many cases already active. Some are genuinely about safety. Others are about efficiency and revenue. But all of them share one thing in common. They punish drivers who aren't paying very close attention. You'll learn which everyday habits are now considered violations, how insurance companies are being notified faster than ever, why license renewals are becoming stricter for older drivers, and which small, inexpensive adjustments can save you thousands of dollars over the next few years. Most importantly, you'll know exactly what to watch for so you don't become one of the drivers learning these rules the hard way. And coming up next, we're starting with the change that's already catching more drivers than any other in early 2026. It doesn't involve speeding, it doesn't involve alcohol, and it doesn't require an accident. In fact, many drivers don't even realize they've done anything wrong until the ticket arrives. Over the last several weeks, I've been reviewing official provincial motor vehicle updates, transportation notices, insurance bulletins, and legislative rollouts to understand what's really changing on Canadian roads in 2026. And more importantly, how those changes affect everyday drivers, especially seniors. I'm not here to scare you or overwhelm you with legal terminology. I'm here to translate what the system is doing right now in plain language so you can protect your license, your finances, and your independence. Because in 2026, the biggest risk isn't reckless driving. It's driving the way you always have. Assuming the rules still work the same way, let's start with the enforcement change, spreading faster than almost anything else nationwide, and it's already catching tens of thousands of drivers off guard. Distracted driving is no longer being treated as a secondary issue. For years, many provinces followed what was called secondary enforcement. That meant an officer couldn't pull you over just for holding your phone. They needed another reason first, maybe a broken taillight or rolling through a stop sign. That layer of protection is disappearing. As 2026 rolls in, additional provinces have officially moved to primary enforcement. And even provinces that already had hands-free laws are now enforcing them far more aggressively. What that means in real life is simple and uncomfortable. If an officer sees a phone in your hand, or even sees the glow of a screen on your lap at night, that alone is now enough to justify a traffic stop. No speeding, no swerving, no warning. And in several provinces, enforcement guidance has expanded what counts as use. It's no longer just texting while driving, holding your phone to check directions, scrolling a playlist while stopped at a red light, tapping a screen to dismiss a notification while traffic is paused. All of that can now qualify as distracted driving under updated definitions being enforced in 2026. This is where many experienced drivers get tripped up. For decades, stopping at a red light felt like a safe pause. You weren't moving, so you weren't really driving. But the law no longer sees it that way. If you're in the driver's seat in control of the vehicle and your phone is in your hand, you're considered actively operating the car, even if your foot is on the brake. That single assumption has changed the legal landscape, and the penalties are no longer symbolic. We're not talking about a small fine that you grumble about and move on from. First-time citations in many jurisdictions are now landing in the $200 to $500 range, and that's before court fees or administrative charges. But the ticket itself isn't the real problem. The real damage shows up quietly later when your insurance renews. Insurance companies now treat distracted driving as high-risk behavior, similar to speeding or at-fault accidents. Industry data shows that a single distracted driving citation can raise your premiums anywhere from 15 to 30%, and that increase often sticks around for 3 to 5 years. If you're paying around $500 a year for auto insurance, that's an extra $225 to $450 every year over time. One quick glance at a phone can cost well over $1,000, and that's assuming nothing else happens. For seniors, this hits harder. Many older drivers already pay higher premiums simply because of age-based risk models. A distracted driving mark on your record compounds that effect. And unlike some minor violations, distracted driving citations are rarely forgiven or removed early. Once it's on your record, it's there. What's especially frustrating is that many of these violations are completely preventable with very small changes. If your car doesn't have built-in Bluetooth or voice controls, this is the year to stop improvising. A simple dashboard or vent mount that keeps your phone out of your hands costs less than a single tank of gas. Most modern smartphones can make calls, read texts aloud, and provide turn-by-turn navigation without you touching the screen at all. It takes a little adjustment, but it's far cheaper than the alternative. Another important adjustment is habit-based. If you're stopped at a light, train yourself to treat that moment as still driving. Hands on the wheel, eyes forward, phone untouched. That mindset shift alone can eliminate the most common distracted driving citations now being issued. Because enforcement officers aren't just looking for reckless behavior anymore, they're looking for technical compliance. And in 2026, technical violations are costing real money. This change is already active in many provinces, and more are joining every month, which means even if you haven't been ticketed yet, the odds are rising. And as uncomfortable as this sounds, Distracted driving enforcement is only the beginning because the next change doesn't involve police officers at all. And once it's in place, there's no discretion, no warning, and no conversation. If you think speed limits are enforced the same way they were 5 years ago, the next part is where things get serious. The next enforcement shift is one that many drivers assume doesn't apply to them until it does. Automated speed enforcement has existed for years, but in 2026, it's entering a completely different phase. This is no longer about a few fixed cameras near busy intersections. Provinces are now rolling out AI-powered speed monitoring systems, especially in construction zones, and they're designed to operate with precision that leaves no room for error or explanation. In several provinces, these systems are already active in work zones across major highways. The cameras are paired with radar and timing software that measures your speed the moment you enter the zone and tracks it continuously as you pass through. If workers are present and you exceed the posted limit, even by a small margin, the system records your vehicle, your speed, and your license plate. There's no officer making a judgment call, no warning wave, no pulling you over on the shoulder. The citation arrives later, quietly by mail. What makes this especially dangerous for experienced drivers is how these zones operate. The cameras are only active when workers are present, which sounds reasonable, but many drivers don't realize how narrowly that condition is defined. A single worker standing behind a barrier is enough to activate the system. Temporary signs may not look different from inactive zones you've driven through dozens of times before. And because many of these zones shift locations week to week, relying on memory is no longer reliable. The penalty structure is also designed to escalate. In some provinces, the first violation is issued as a warning, which gives drivers a false sense of security. The second offense often triggers a fine around $150. The third can jump to $300 or more. While some provinces currently classify these as non-moving violations without demerit points, others are already sharing the data directly with insurance companies. That means even if your license isn't affected, your premiums may be. For seniors, this creates a quiet financial risk. You may never interact with law enforcement. You may never step into a courtroom. But your insurance provider sees a pattern of speed-related enforcement, and your rates adjust accordingly. And unlike traditional tickets, there's very little opportunity to contest these violations successfully. The system logs the speed. The speed exceeded the limit. The case is closed. The safest approach in 2026 is to treat every construction zone as absolute. If the sign says 45, you drive 45, not 50, not keeping up with traffic, not just passing through. These systems are calibrated for exact thresholds, and the margin that once existed has disappeared. But construction zones are only part of the story. Cities and school districts are expanding automated enforcement into areas where drivers least expect it, and the rules change based on the clock, not the road. School zone speed cameras are spreading rapidly across provinces. These are not always obvious, and they don't operate the way traditional speed cameras do. Instead of being active all day, they're tied directly to school schedules. Typically, the cameras turn on 30 minutes before school starts and remain active until 30 minutes after the final bell. The same applies in the afternoon during dismissal. During those windows, speed limits often drop dramatically, sometimes to 30 or 40 kilometers per hour. If you exceed that reduced limit by as little as 10 kilometers per hour, the camera captures your plate and a citation is issued. No flashing lights, no immediate feedback. Many drivers don't realize they've been cited until the letter arrives days later. The most common complaint from drivers is confusion. They say they didn't see the sign. They entered the zone just as it became active. They were slowing down but hadn't reached the reduced speed yet. Unfortunately, courts have consistently ruled that drivers are responsible for knowing when school zones are active and adjusting immediately. The enforcement systems are legally upheld, and appeals rarely succeed unless there's a clear technical error. Fines vary, but first offenses often range from $50 to $250. That may not sound catastrophic, but just like with distracted driving, the secondary effects matter. Multiple citations in school zones raise red flags with insurers. And because these violations are camera-based, they accumulate faster than traditional stops. You don't get a warning conversation, you just get a record. There are practical ways to reduce your risk. Navigation apps like Google Maps and Waze are increasingly marking school zones and known camera locations based on user reports and municipal data. These alerts aren't a license to speed, they're reminders to heighten awareness. When you hear that alert, it's your cue to scan for signage, check your speed, and assume enforcement is active. Another important habit is time awareness, OS. If you regularly drive through residential areas in the morning or afternoon, build a mental buffer into your routine. Assume school zones are active during typical start and dismissal times, even if you don't see children present. The system doesn't care whether kids are visible, it only cares whether the time window is open. What's happening here is a broader shift away from discretionary enforcement and toward automated compliance. The system is no longer asking whether you intended to break the rule. It's asking whether the rule was technically broken. And in 2026, that distinction matters more than ever. And as uncomfortable as these camera systems are, the next change goes even deeper. It doesn't rely on cameras or speed at all. It redefines what it means to be legally sober behind the wheel, and it shrinks the margins so much that many social drivers won't realize they've crossed it until it's too late. For decades, drivers across Canada grew up with one number burned into their memory: 0.08. That was the legal line. Stay under it and you were considered sober. Cross it and you were in serious trouble. In 2026, that assumption is no longer safe. A quiet but powerful shift is underway, and it's one of the most consequential changes on the road this decade. Several provinces are exploring or moving toward a lower legal blood alcohol concentration, and the margin for error is shrinking to almost nothing. This change is modeled after approaches that have shown reductions in alcohol-related crashes. Some jurisdictions have lowered legal BAC limits, and safety advocates have praised the outcomes. Now other provinces are examining similar reductions, and some are already enforcing stricter interpretations under existing laws. Here's why this matters so much, especially for older drivers. A BAC that's lower than the traditional threshold doesn't feel impaired to most people. It can be a beer with dinner, a glass of wine at a restaurant, 2 drinks over a couple of hours at a family gathering. Many drivers would have confidently driven home under those circumstances for years without issue. In 2026, that confidence can put you at serious legal risk. Alcohol affects people differently as they age. Metabolism slows, medications interact, body composition changes. A drink that once had minimal effect may now raise your BAC faster and keep it elevated longer. And the estimates people rely on, weight charts, drink counts, timing rules, are unreliable at best. 2 people can drink the same amount and end up with very different BAC readings. What makes this shift especially dangerous is that the penalties haven't softened just because enforcement is stricter. In provinces adopting or enforcing lower standards, the consequences look almost identical to traditional impaired driving penalties. We're talking about immediate license suspension, mandatory ignition interlock devices even for first-time offenders, fines that can range from $1,000 to $5,000, required education programs, possible jail time, and insurance premiums that skyrocket for years. The law treats crossing lower thresholds with the same seriousness. There is no longer a safe mental calculation you can rely on, no formula that guarantees you're okay to drive. And for seniors, the stakes are even higher. An impaired driving charge can trigger additional scrutiny during license renewal. It can raise red flags with insurers. It can even affect employment for those who still work or volunteer in roles that require driving. The safest rule in 2026 is also the simplest. If you plan to drink at all, don't drive. Arrange transportation before the first drink. Use rideshare services, ask a family member, stay the night. The cost of a ride home is always less than the cost of an impaired driving charge, both financially and personally. If you find this kind of explanation helpful and want to stay ahead of changes like this as they roll out, make sure you're subscribed to Retire Path. These rules are evolving quickly, and staying informed is becoming just as important as driving carefully. Now, let's shift to a change that's affecting different aspects of vehicle ownership and registration. License renewal processes are becoming more complex, and documentation requirements are tightening across provinces. For years, renewing a license was mostly a routine task. a form, a fee, maybe proof of address. That era is ending. Provinces are now moving toward what they call enhanced identity verification frameworks, and it fundamentally changes how licenses are issued, renewed, and validated. What this means in practical terms is stricter documentation and tighter timelines. In several provinces, renewing a license now requires what officials consider strong proof of identity: birth certificates, verified social insurance numbers, and for non-citizens, documentation that directly ties license validity to immigration status. For many drivers, especially those who have renewed online for years, this change comes as a shock. You may receive a renewal notice that looks familiar at first glance, but buried in the details is a line that says in-person verification required. Ignoring that line can quietly invalidate your license the moment it expires. You don't get a warning, you don't get an extra month. You simply go from valid to invalid overnight. At the same time, provinces are exploring digital driver's licenses. These live in secure smartphone applications and can be scanned by law enforcement. They're encrypted, tamper-resistant, and in many cases more secure than physical cards. For drivers who are comfortable with technology, they can be convenient. No fumbling for a wallet, no worrying about losing a physical card. But here's the part many people miss. Digital credentials do not eliminate the need for periodic in-person verification. In fact, some provinces are making in-person verification more frequent, specifically because digital credentials exist. The goal is to prevent identity fraud. That means even if you have a digital license on your phone, you may still be required to appear in person every few years to confirm your identity. For seniors, this can be confusing. You may think that because you've renewed successfully online in the past, you can do so again. Or you may assume that having a digital credential means you're fully covered. Neither assumption is safe in 2026. The rules now vary by province and by individual license type. The only reliable approach is to read renewal notices carefully and follow them exactly. If the notice says in person, treat it as mandatory. Skipping it can turn your valid license into an invalid one without any dramatic moment to alert you. Driving with an invalid license carries serious consequences, even if the expiration was accidental. Insurance may deny coverage. Citations become more severe, and reinstatement can require starting the entire process over, including written and road tests. Now, let's move to a rule change that almost everyone thinks they already understand, but that has expanded in a way that's catching thousands of drivers off guard. Move-over laws have existed for years, and most people associate them with police cars and ambulances. If you see flashing lights on the shoulder, you move over or slow down. That made sense. In 2026, that rule has been broadened significantly under expanded move-over laws now active or taking effect in multiple provinces. The requirement no longer applies only to emergency vehicles. It now applies to any stationary vehicle displaying hazard lights. That includes tow trucks, maintenance vehicles, and yes, regular passenger cars stopped on the shoulder with their hazards blinking. This is a major shift. If you're traveling at highway speed in the lane closest to the shoulder, and you pass a stopped vehicle with hazard lights without moving over or significantly reducing speed, you may now be committing a moving violation. In some provinces, fines have doubled or even quadrupled to reinforce compliance. Penalties can range from a few hundred to over $1,000, often with demerit points added to your record. Why the severity? Roadside fatalities have reached alarming levels. Emergency responders, tow truck operators, and stranded motorists are struck and killed every year by passing traffic. The expanded law treats a family broken down on the side of the road with the same legal protection as a police officer. From a safety standpoint, it's a strong move. From a driver awareness standpoint, it's a trap for anyone operating on autopilot. For seniors, this requires a shift in scanning behavior. Flashing lights ahead are no longer something you register at the last second. They're an early warning. The moment you see hazards or emergency lights, you should be checking mirrors and planning a lane change. If you can safely move over, do it early. Signal clearly. If you can't move over safely, slow down significantly until you've passed the stopped vehicle. This isn't just about avoiding a ticket. It's about protecting people in vulnerable situations. That stopped car could be your spouse, your child, or you someday. And while enforcement is stricter, the intention is genuinely about safety. Still, many drivers will be cited simply because they didn't realize the rule had expanded. They assumed it only applied to police or ambulances. In 2026, that assumption is wrong. Hazard lights now carry legal weight, and ignoring them can cost you dearly. Taken together, all of these changes point to a single truth about driving in 2026. A driver's license is no longer a one-time achievement that lasts forever. It's a performance-based privilege that's constantly evaluated. Whether you're a new driver or 76 years old, the system is paying closer attention to your behavior, your compliance, and your documentation than ever before. Automation has reduced discretion, data sharing has increased consequences, and enforcement has shifted from reactive to proactive. That doesn't mean the roads are becoming hostile, it means they're becoming monitored. And the drivers who fare best in this environment are the ones who adapt early. So, what should you do now, today, to protect yourself? First, take 10 minutes to visit your provincial motor vehicle department website and review any updates for 2026. Don't rely on memory. Laws vary and assumptions are expensive. Second, if you drive across provincial lines, familiarize yourself with the biggest differences, especially around phone use, speed enforcement, and alcohol limits. Third, check your license and registration renewal notices carefully. If an in-person visit is required, schedule it early. Don't wait. Fourth, make small habit changes that eliminate risk. Keep your phone out of your hands. Treat construction and school zones as absolute. Move over early for any flashing lights. And finally, talk to the people you care about. Parents, children, neighbors. Many of these changes are designed to catch drivers who aren't paying attention. Sharing this information can prevent stress, fines, and even loss of driving privileges. A few minutes of awareness can save thousands of dollars and preserve independence. If this breakdown helped you understand what's changing and why it matters, consider sharing it with someone who drives regularly, especially a senior in your family. And if you'd like to stay informed as these rules continue to evolve, make sure you're subscribed to Retire Path and turn on notifications. Driving laws don't stand still anymore, and staying informed is now part of staying safe. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. Drive carefully, stay aware, and protect what matters.